A former superhero becomes a washed-up has-been and tries to move on in this week's episode of Panelism. Welcome to Panelism, the show about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Taylor Trask.
I'm Todd A.
And Todd, we're back again. Face
to
face. Well, not face to face. You have the mic to mic.
Mic to mic. Yeah.
Just a couple of silver spoons. We're back. I'm sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Flashback.
Yeah. Which like no one's gonna remember. I mean, that's a deep pull if there ever was one.
Yeah, it's one of those show your age references for sure.
That's back when so if anybody's really truly interested, there's a show in the 80s called Silver Spoons starring Ricky Schroeder, but also Carlton from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when he was like 10. And it's I
didn't even think about Carlton being in that because all I remember, and this is another reference that will date me, is Aaron Gray, who was also in Buck Rogers.
Oh. Wow. I did not know this.
Always at Comic-Con, and I'm always like, wow, it's Aaron Gray from Buck Rogers.
Now, is that one of those things where just because he keeps showing up, he sort of perpetuates his own myth now so that more people know him from that as that guy from Comic-Con and not, oh, you were in the show that I once liked or watched. She, sorry.
Yeah.
Wait, is this Battlestar Galactica? For some reason,
no.
Buck Rogers. Sorry, Jesus.
Right? Am I
there's
right?
only
Buck
one.
Rogers?
Yeah, I had Battlestar Galactica in my mind. For some weird, but anyway, the question still holds. Todd, is this something? Because there's a sort of cast of actors who do make the convention circuit,
yes.
And at some point, I would imagine a lot of the audience, as new younger folks, kind of get into all this, that they're like, I don't know your work, but I know you from being at this convention, 5, 6, 7 years in a row, or whatever it is.
Right. I don't know that anyone would. Yeah, I think it's sort of like if you. It's one of those things too where you think like, man, if I haven't gotten my Buck Rogers autographs by now, time to move on that. Like that was in when was that even 80s or 70s? 79 to 81. Yeah. Wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So back when she was 29 to 31.
And no offense, I'm sure a lot of people love that. I'm just suggesting that there's a good chunk of people who have never seen that, but they see the usual suspects, like the actress who plays the original Uhura from Star Trek. She was in some stuff earlier in the aughts, but I don't know as much now. So it's like, I would imagine like a lot of people going to see these kind of older actors from these shows that they never knew. And it's interesting that autograph lines still exist because I would imagine the selfie line would be more, and people are taking selfies too. But
I think it's all the same, kind of thing now. It's I wonder. But Nichelle Nichols is who you're thinking of, and she definitely makes appearances at Comic-Con as well.
A lot of them.
Lou Ferrigno canceled this year.
I wonder why.
Well, I think he's in LA, and he's sometimes just like, they have him at a table, and then sometimes he's like, nah, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah. Interesting. The last time we saw him in a major comics movie was his cameo in the Ed Norton Hulk, correct?
It's not even the Ed Norton Hulk. His cameo is in the Ang Lee Hulk, where he and Stan Lee are security guards who work where Eric Bana works.
I thought that was. Oh, interesting. I thought that was the Ed Norton. I thought he had another cameo in the.
He may have. Sorry. Yeah, I should have clarified that. I haven't
seen the Ed Norton Hulk in so long, and partially because once you get to Ruffalo, you're just like, well, this is what it should have been the whole time, and so you kind of like it's kind of tough. I mean, Jesus, who's going back to watch that Eric Bana one first? If you are, fine, but ugh. And then the Ed Norton one is actually okay. They bring forward a lot of those elements. Ed Norton would have been in Avengers if he hadn't been difficult to deal with. But Ruffalo was kind of, Ruffalo nailed the character. Like he was like Bill Bixby. Like my entrance into the Hulk was the TV show. going back to Lou Ferrigno, like that I
Yeah.
freaking love that show growing up as a kid, mainly because Bill Bixby played not Bruce Banner. What is it? Is it Eric Banner? David Banner. Yeah. Which I always wondered about why that happened.
It's a different Hulk, not canon.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fine. But like, I love that sort of Jekyll and Hyde way of looking at it, where it's like, you know, he doesn't treat it like a disease. He treats it like there's this other guy, you know, like, and right away in the first Avengers, like that's how Ruffalo framed it. He's like, you know, the other guy is coming at some point. And you're like, ooh, this is much more Jekyll and Hyde. This isn't like, yeah, he's you know, his life is upended by this condition, but he, you know, the Ed Norton version was like, I have this disease and I have to monitor my body and make sure that this disease doesn't flare back up again. And I just, that's never worked for me. And again, the Eric Bana one, we'll just forget about entirely.
Well, I would argue Eric Bana is a good Bruce Banner in a bad Hulk movie. Maybe
he's too good looking. He's too well built. Like you watch him in that movie and you're just like, man, you could just be Captain America just now. Like why even bother making you the Hulk? Like why is this happening?
That was a thing that like Bill Bixby had that nobody else had, which was like he looked like a scientist nerd. Yeah. You know, like he looked like Bruce Banner was supposed to look. I got really cool news on Lou Ferrigno because I Googled him thinking like, what did I see him in recently? By recently, I meant 10 years ago in I Love You, Man. But this is very cool. So he did his in-person cameo is in the Ang Lee Hulk. He did a voice cameo in the Incredible Hulk, the Edward Norton one.
Okay.
But he has done voice collaboration as the Hulk, uncredited, in the Avengers Grimm, Avengers Age of Ultron, and Thor Ragnarok.
Wow. So he's like the voice of the Hulk is incorporating Lou Ferrigno's actual voice.
Isn't that cool?
That is super. Why is he uncredited?
MCU has been doing that.
God, that should be one of the things they mentioned in the opening credits. Like, and Lou Ferrigno voices the Hulk, kind of. And it's like, put that in there. That'd be cool. They're cool about everything else.
I feel that felt very heartwarming to learn that.
I mean, if anybody's going to have a take, I mean, maybe that's why that version of the Hulk just kind of resonated with me more because it was Ruffalo, but then it's also the voice is, interesting. Well,
you're feeling the Ferrigno through the voice.
Yeah, I don't. There's once. I mean, I was just sort of lukewarm and never really got the Hulk until Avengers, and it's like, man, this is what we should have had the entire time. It just really worked for me, and it continues to. Real quick, we talked about this on our last episode, but it's, you know, with some more hindsight, is there any one moment from Comic-Con 2019 that you're like, oh man, that really defined the event for me? Whether it be something you didn't even see, like a Marvel panel, or something you did see. But like, is there anything with space? Is there something that really kind of crystallizes that this year for you?
To me, and I mentioned this in our episode, but it was those two panels. The one where I met Whitney Gardner and Sarah Anderson, and Thomas Lennon spoke in it, which I thought was great. The Art of Storytelling, and the Man-Eaters panel. So I'll talk more about the Man-Eaters panel when we do our episode on that book. Those books, plural. But yeah, I mean, it's just that like personal interaction, you know, that's cool.
Cool. I figured that would still be the case. I just think, you know, with another week of padding, I realized just gotten back. When we recorded last week.
I realized that over the week, that's what I've talked about. Like that, you know, when I've sort of other friends have asked me for an update, I'm like, oh yeah, and this was just so cool, you know, and meeting these people, like, we're not, you know, nobody knows panelism. We're not like widely known, but just that idea that like now we do something and we, you know, when you meet that creator, you're able to say, hey, I love your work so much that I talked about it on my podcast for an hour. So yeah, that's kind of a cool thing.
Very cool.
Perhaps we should be more ambitious in our outreach.
I think we can be. Well, speaking of books and creators, I have a book this week that I teased a little bit before SDCC started, and I thought it was an appropriate pick given that event. It is one that I grabbed at my local. I have two local haunts. I've mentioned before: Escape Velocity Comics, downtown Colorado Springs, and then Muse Comics, which is a little further east, but still, I mean, basically 15 minutes from my house, 20 minutes from my house. And both of them are fantastic shops. In this particular case, I went to Escape Velocity and grabbed the trade paperback of The Further Adventures of Nick Wilson. And this is written by Eddie Gorodetsky and Mark Draco. Hopefully one of those is correct. Artists Ian Churchill and Steven Sadowski, published by Image. And this is a one-off trade paperback, so it's not volume one. It is just a graphic novel. First issue was released in January of 2018. If you want to go back and pick up single issues.
Oh, but it did come out as single issues. It's just
there
they
were
were
five,
only ever going to make 5. Gotcha.
Yeah, there were 5 original single issues, but yeah, this was he could continue it on if he wanted to, but it tells such a nice compact start and end of a story that I would be sort of disappointed if they wanted to continue it.
Well, you mentioned the store where you got this right off the bat, which leads me to the question, like, how did you hear of this? Did someone recommend it, or did you stumble across it?
It was just one of those things. They put it in a sort of a featured spinner rack or end cap rack, and the cover is frankly really engaging. It's a cover of what we come to find as Nick Wilson reading the very book you're holding, and so it's like an infinite regression. You see him holding the book. On the cover, it's the same thing. On the cover, it's the same thing. Just goes down and down, and then around him are racks of other comics that are all his adventures, like different covers from his individual adventures. Some of them are parodies of different things. Like there's clearly a Watchmen style, like Nick Wilson, like his costume has like a blood, kind of splatter on it. And they're, Nick Wilson in big yellow font on the left-hand side. There's other classic sort of covers that you'll see represented there, but it paints this world of, oh, here's this guy that used to be important, and now he's this schlub reading about his own adventures, and I'm curious what that's about. I thought it was more of a like just an autobiography. I didn't realize it was just a completely fictitious world about this dude. So let me jump in. This is the back of the book summary, as we usually do. For a few years in his early 20s, Nick Wilson had superpowers and all the acclaim associated with them. When those powers vanished, so did his fame, sending him from national hero to late-night punchline. Now Nick's on the verge of turning 30 and struggling to figure out who he is. Packing on an extra 20 pounds and peering at his life through a medical marijuana haze, he's trying to build himself a future. But all that's left is a man who hasn't been super for a very long time. And like I said, this collects issues 1 through 5. So this is a captivating book because there's some big themes here. There's the theme of, the quarter life crisis. Somebody who was once derived his value and self-worth from something now has to find a completely different way to do that because he lost that thing that made him special. It's also very reminiscent of a lot of times throughout the story, I was reminded of the high school quarterback, who in high school, or the college quarterback, but maybe the high school quarterback's more apropos. That guy who's sort of beloved in his town for doing this thing, but then once high school is over and that's all done, it's just constantly, you get a little fatter, you start drinking more booze, you lose your step, you're not really good at anything else, and then you're kind of just lost in this haze for
the peaked too early
yes yes
problem.
Yeah, and then it also another big theme that resonates with me is that everyone changes throughout life. So what you were in your 20s is not necessarily what you are in your 30s and 40s and so forth. And this idea of change is constant, and enemies become friends become distant. The life that you sort of thought you had when everything was going your way was always ephemeral. It was never going to be consistent. It was never going to last. So I love it when books take that on, because it's like, it helps people work through that, gives you another perspective of how you can work through that, and mainly just reminds you that, hey, this is always going to happen. The good times, always be looking for the next, whatever the next good times are, because what you're living in now has got an expiration date on it.
Well, and what a cool lens to look at that through. It's so funny to think of superhero powers that sort of peak and then fade. And we've seen a lot of stories about where they humanize the superheroes and they're a little bit older and a little slower, like Watchmen especially. But that just sounds so funny to say he lost his powers in his 20s.
Yep.
That is really like the high school quarterback, who never went pro kind of thing.
And he looks just like that too. And they never explain how he lost his powers, or even how he got
Oh.
his powers. That's kind of left vague, which I appreciate, because the book is not about that. It's like, oh no, that happened, and they do some flashbacks throughout the book, but not a lot. Most of it is present day, and most of it it kind of had a bande dessinée sort of feel to it, where it's just a lot of panels of people talking. Very similar to a book I reviewed previously, Alex and Ada. There's a heightened energy to it. There's definitely sort of a superhero panache that you get in the way characters, their body positions, the way they react to things.
When you say that about the single, I don't know exactly how you just phrased it, but you're talking about like where it's just a single head in dialogue. That's the panel, and then the next panel is another single head. That's that conversation.
No, not necessarily. There's just,
or it's just the two.
There's very little of him flying around in a costume. It's all like him and his former girlfriend in a grocery store, just shopping and talking.
Oh, okay.
And him in an office building having a meeting about something, and then him in a bar talking and drinking, and him it's just like, it's a lot of just people talking. And the whole thing's kind of like a high school reunion as a graphic novel, because he interacts with a lot of his former. You're introduced to a lot of the characters through his eye, but in kind of these sort of like, I haven't seen you in a while kind of moments, and then it all kind of culminates. Let me jump into the character bios though, so give you a sense of our cast of characters. There's Nick Wilson, of course. And I'm just going to read sort of the description from Wikipedia. Earth's only superhero who lost his powers. The series starts off with him acting as a Nick Wilson impersonator at children's birthday parties, which is really funny because it's him pretending to be his former self. Nobody believes that this guy was once Nick Wilson.
Much like Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2.
Dude, it's exactly I could not shake off that reference. I'm like, wow, that must have been an intentional little like shout out to Ghostbusters.
That's really funny, because I only just recently rewatched that and was like, I totally forgot about that moment. Where you see Winston and Ray like running up. You think they're on a mission, and then nope.
Well, and it's played the same way, right? Where it's just like, you can just see how far this guy's fallen from the glory days. Much like the Ghostbusters, where you're like, man, all these kids are just like giving them shit and like yelling He-Man, and it's hilarious. There's Jane, Nick's old girlfriend from the superhero days. She has very intentionally become a little chubby and a little boring and just kind of plain. And she was, in the glory days, she was the hot, like sexy girlfriend to the superhero, like the damsel in distress that the America's sweetheart, all this stuff. And much like Nick, like she couldn't live up to that long term, nor did she want to. So she just kind of went a different direction.
Is she no longer his girlfriend?
No. When they meet up again, she's kind of moved on, and she's his friend. She's really like almost like a Jerry and Elaine Seinfeld kind of a situation where like, hey, we dated once, but we're better friends. And he tries to desperately flirt with her again. She's like, oh, Nick, those days are behind us. Like this, you need to find somebody more your speed. There's Clive Morganfeld, who was Nick Wilson's arch nemesis. He's very much a lot like a black kingpin. They sort of draw him the same way with the cigar and like the big stature, and everything is exaggerated in terms of what he wants and how he talks and everything. He wants to team up with Nick to create a Nick Wilson Experience Museum. So that's why he comes back out of the woodwork, is to get Nick to sign off on the licensing and then literally be the mascot for this this downtown museum, much like you'd see in Washington, D.C. with the Spy Museum or something.
Is he still a bad guy?
He's
a criminal?
No, he's still just a very successful businessman. And it's almost like the public or the media kind of just treats him like, we remember when you were that colorful character and now you're just a regular, member of society. And he's still kind of, everybody kind of plays off that time as like, oh, wasn't that fun? Like nothing truly terrible must have happened. Although something does kind of happen that's very interesting. I'll get into in a second.
Well, now, one other question is, was Nick Wilson's superhero name Nick Wilson?
You know what? I think yes.
Because I'm just wondering, like, how is there a Nick Wilson Experience Museum? Like,
no,
that's like
you're
having
right.
a Clark Kent experience,
It's definitely no. Everybody knows that's who he is because he's got an NW on his costume, and it's definitely everybody knows who he like his secret identity I don't think was very secret, and everybody knows who he is. It's just that he's such a schlub now that nobody believes, or people who know him know this, but like the public at large is like, wait, you were Nick Wilson? Wow. It was just kind of like, what happened?
Yeah, and it's not an especially unique name where you might.
Yeah.
Now, are there other superheroes in this universe, and do they also go by their given names?
Let me finish. I have 2 more characters.
Sorry.
Speaking of unique names, there's Xavier Morganfield, who is Clive Morganfield's son, and not really interested in the family business. It's interesting. He becomes more of a sort of a buddy to Nick Wilson, given the fact that he couldn't live under his father's shadow or his pressure. And then there's another guy named Daryl Foster, who was Nick's former sidekick. His character name was called Jumpin' Jack. And now he's a protege. Now he's a protege to Clive Morganfield. So like Clive's son is kind of a loser in Clive's eyes. So Daryl Foster kind of steps in and fills that role, which is interesting because he was Nick Wilson's sidekick. Now he's this really cranky kind of middle-aged dude, not really interested in reliving the glory days at all. He's very by the book. He does not respect or appreciate Nick's just general laziness and attitude. It's a really interesting dynamic now where like the son of the villain becomes the friend of the hero, and the former sidekick becomes the protege of the villain. It's just
is Xavier in that sense sort of like the Scott Evil of this world?
Yes. Ooh, yes. Excellent. Yes. Now, before Scott Evil turns truly evil, he is very much that.
But is Xavier like competent, just not in the family business, or like not competent in any way?
Well, he's competent. He's just he does not care. Like he doesn't have attention to detail like his father or Daryl does. Daryl kind of becomes the son that Clive always wished Xavier would be. Also, they play with this very, very in a very classy way, but Xavier is gay. And so there's always, I think his father, it might be a little homophobic. There's a lot of interesting subtext there that they don't shine a giant honking light on, but it really colors the really, the human beings behind each of these names, which is interesting. I mentioned earlier that they're nothing, they kind of treat the 4 to 5 years of the Nick Wilson superhero world with a lot of kind of levity, and like, oh, that was, what a fantastical time in our history where that was the case, but there was one event that happened that we, the readers, get to see that was very tragic. It's a stand in issue number 4. Most of the issue deals with Nick confronting a man he had once saved. I don't want to spoil what happens, but a guy he once saved approaches him in a bar, and you realize that Nick saving him may not have gone as well as we would have wanted, or that Nick even realized. And there's a really cool twist with that character and that storyline that gives Nick kind of a feeling of, oh, wow, maybe saving people and hurting people is a lot harder than I thought it was at that point in time. So I would definitely, if you're, and the way they draw that particular issue, because they're referencing so many different timelines, the art does correspond beautifully to, how people are remembering things and how Nick is having this conversation with this guy. The art is very different in that issue compared to every other issue, and I think that's very intentional.
Yeah.
So I loved that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to go back to my question, like about the universe. Like, do you get the impression that there are other super heroes there? Did someone take over for him?
No, I mean, he's the only guy. There's not like a Justice League or any kind of other thing. This was a fluke situation. This guy just kind of got powers one day. Again, we don't really know why or how. And his usual arch nemesis was this, billionaire gangster businessman. But that's about it. No, it's, and I think the novelty of it is very clear throughout the book. That America, it's not like America's turned over all of its sovereignty and like the hope of safety to this guy. He just was he's just like a colorful character. Like, oh man, it's Nick Wilson. There he is. He's gonna save a cat or stop a building from tipping over. But it's not like he's dealing with the world-ending event or something. Do you get the feeling that like I mean, because you said you never learned the origin of his powers nor why they went away. Yeah, I'm just curious about like how they play that. Like, is it a lot about his, do they play up
how he feels about the loss of his powers, or like is that what's made him an aimless kind of 30 something? Okay.
Yeah. That's a huge part. Like his sort of PTSD is just again trying to figure out like where does he derive his value? Because this much like a high school quarterback, once you sort of achieve that title and that role, you're kind of set. You don't really have to try. It's just like this is your title. This is how everybody thinks about you. And you can kind of just coast on that until you can't. And he very much has a similar arc. There actually is another issue where he goes to his high school reunion. And I think it's his 10-year, in fact. And he one of the best things about this graphic novel is that the notes at the end are all highly specific to that issue, and they're really robust. Like you can almost take the notes to the reader and make your own little like single issue that's just a really nice compendium. For example, at the end of issue 1 or 2, I believe, he the author goes and like talks about all the music that inspired that issue. And he goes on for a while. It's like he talks about the Grateful Dead. He talks about the Memphis Jug Band. He talks about, he gives like a bunch of different albums to listen to that kind of like help you define that, like Mississippi by Bob Dylan, different stuff. And another issue, the reunion issue, he talks about the nature of cliche and other subjects. And he goes into explaining like the talent show people, the camping show, 2 dates on the prom, like the kinds of people you see at a reunion and why. So really, really kind of dives into it, much like Alan Moore writes a lot of supplemental material, but that's less commentary and more sort of context to the world he's building. This feels a lot like that, but it's all about, hey, this was my mind, where my mind was in writing this. And these are the kinds of things I was taking in, which, man, I love that, especially with a good, nuanced graphic novel that's like this. I love that artist commentary. It's almost like when you go to a museum, you kind of want the little plaque next to each piece to be really, really robust, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it is not. And this is almost like that, where it's like, hey, now you've seen the work, now really, really dive into the meat behind it.
Well, it also reminds me of like, wasn't it Gunning for Hits, where they made a playlist for each issue? Yeah, like that kind of like here's an experience related to the comic book, but taking you out of the comic book world. Well, I was going to ask, so given that this started publishing in 2018, is it rooted in like contemporary American society and culture? And is that at all like what's going on with Nick?
Kind of. I mean, they have whatever the iPhone was at that time,
right?
Is what the iPhone is in here, but it's, they're not talking about Trump or anything like that. It's probably meant to be a little timeless in that this could be a story as relevant in the 80s as it is now.
Right. It's not an allegory for like American power diminishing or something like that.
No. This is highly, highly personal and individual. This is a guy having to kind of figure out what's he going to be when he grows up. And all these people kind of not pulling him almost too extreme of a word. All these people subtly influencing him one way or the other. Jane trying to help him build confidence back up again and kind of help him figure out. There's, one of the early storylines is he meets this girl in a bar and he's kind of trying to figure out where she is or who she is. And then at the very end, you get some closure around that because he kind of had a crush on her, but he didn't know. He's so unconfident about everything that he couldn't really do much. He walks around like Jeffrey Lebowski. He's got cargo pants on, a hoodie, fat man t-shirt, and he's just kind of that. Imagine if that happened to Superman. Imagine if that happened to any of these guys. It's like, wow, what do I do? And it wasn't like he had a successful side career. Like he's Bruce Wayne, so he'll be okay. It's like, no, this is literally all he had, and now it's gone.
Yeah, I'm picturing like if you watched Guardians of the Galaxy and then Parks and Rec, and your impression was that Star-Lord went from this muscly hero to like this kind of schlubby, like,
Oh man, like he got knocked in the head, so he's a little simple now,
and so then he just lives in a pit.
Oh man, yes. Holy crap. Talk about an experience. Imagine Star-Lord falls, like you can almost just write like a little scene, like he gets like Gamora after Endgame, like the old resurrected Gamora, like gets him, knocks him off the ship or kicks him out of the ship, and then they fly off, and he has amnesia. He's like, "Where am I? I'm in Indiana." Okay, Exactly. You know, if you also like, you know, you mentioned Ghostbusters before, or rather Ghostbusters 2 very specifically, but if you also like Galaxy Quest or The Incredibles, I'll even throw Watchmen in because it just, you know, that deconstruction of the superhero always comes back and is always satisfying. I would even, you had mentioned Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Excellent. Or no, is it Hancock? Hancock.
Hancock. Right.
The Will Smith
Different
movie.
Will Smith movies.
Oh my God, what
Hitch
a great
and
reference. No, I always forget that existed and that it was a superhero movie because it was so subtle and underplayed. Man, I would say Hancock and Galaxy Quest kind of combined are exactly this tone, because you've got, from the Galaxy Quest angle, you've got this kind of washed up guy trying to sort of relive, you know, relive his glory days to some degree. You know, maybe the costume is a little tighter now, or things aren't quite as bright and shiny as they used to be. But the Hancock storyline is even more apropos, because here's this guy who had just kind of given up on this thing. In the case of Hancock, he still has his powers, but he's highly dysfunctional. Similar kind of vibe here.
Isn't the Nick Wilson story like, you know, is it played for laughs, or is it really played for that like pathos? Because Hancock's like pretty tough. Like, it's not a funny movie.
Yeah, there's definitely funny moments in this, but it is just a good all around. I mean, there's that one issue, that issue 4, where that former guy confronts him, gets a little heavy. But it's just a delightfully paced book. You get all the, you know, there's drama, there's comedy, there's just good, wonderful, slow, you know, a lot of 2-person scenes, a lot of just getting heady and letting the conversation just evolve, which is so nice. Because, I mean, hell, I've been reading a couple books lately that are just, you know, high speed till the very end. So it's kind of nice just to sit and just relax. And let this, this would be a great early morning or like late night read if you want to bust out some cognac or some bourbon and just read some slow, good deliberate storytelling. I think I'd have this on there. I'm just shocked that I never even knew it came out, right?
Yeah.
January of last year. We're doing this in 2019. This was a year ago, January. I didn't even see issue 1 through 5 ever. So that when this popped out as a graphic novel, and it's kind of one of those classic Image conundrums of, this should have just been a trade paperback from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's not really something where I could wait a month in between each issue. I just don't know why they don't just go for it and just publish it that way.
I'd hate to think that the trade was dependent on the single issues, because I too, like, I go to the Image section, you know, every time I'm at the comic book store, and I never saw this. So a good tie into that is when you've got that cognac in your lounge slippers. Did you read this digitally or in print?
Since I was at Escape Velocity, I bought the print trade paperback. I think this is the one thing I haven't really talked a lot about is the art. I mentioned issue 4 a little bit, but the art is very much kind of a classic throwback. It feels very 80s. The kind of a little desaturated. Again, it kind of has a bande dessinée sort of French kind of feel to it a little bit, but definitely something where that you want a tangible, like you want to see the colors printed. You want to see it, like the actual ink out. I don't know if I would have the same relationship with it digitally, which, you know, if you listen to past episodes, sometimes I go the other way. I'm like, no, this has to be digital. In this case, I'd say, no, you will appreciate it more. It's a warm tactile experience. And I think digital would probably get in the way of that.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm kind of scrolling through the art now, and
I will say this: the covers are just immaculate. I posted one of them right before Comic-Con, and the whole book is not like that. The covers are very much standalone. The rest of the art is completely fine, but those covers are just the level of detail and the color composition, just they're amazing. So in that sense, I can see why they would do single issues, because just the collectability of this is huge. But it's get them all at the same. If you're gonna get single issues, buy them all at once. Don't henpeck your way through this.
Yeah, it's definitely like a novel meant to be read, not an arc of a longer story or something.
Yeah.
Very cool. Once again, you have brought an interesting book that I was totally unaware of.
Well, and let's give credit to Escape Velocity for A,
Yeah.
stalking it, and B, highlighting it in such a way that it drew my attention. I'm like, well, this is cool. And then, when I brought it up, they're like, oh yes, Nick Wilson. Like they were all familiar with it. So I was like, okay, well and that's a smart group over there. So I would imagine if they all knew it and liked it, that it was definitely something to pick up. But it just goes back to that, we were talking before we were recording. There's a lot to be said for comiXology and the ability to quickly consume stuff digitally, but it'll be a long while before comiXology gets as good at recommending as some of the local shops that you and I go to. Their quality and their knowledge of both their customers, but also their inventory and their ability to kind of match you to a pick that you may not have even heard of. Even unintentionally in this case, like, hey, maybe you'll like this. And it's like, I absolutely did. That the magic of that, I still chase every time I go to a comic shop. Fortunately, I had a really nice run of it this weekend where I'll give a quick teaser. If you're not reading books by Ahoy, which is a new indie publisher, man, this may be my new image. They are doing some really great work right now. And I just had, again, that spirit of like, holy crap, I never knew this existed. And this might be my new favorite thing. That's like a drug that I chase every time I walk into that shop. And sometimes you don't get it. It's a little disappointing, but a lot of times you do. And that's kind of, hopefully this podcast acts in a similar capacity for listeners.
Yeah, for sure. And what you and I were discussing before we started recording was my, I don't know, sort of a, what do you call, regret, lament or something that I had not, sort of didn't know a clerk at a comic book store enough to ask for a recommendation, but they are the librarians of the comic shop, and they're
the librarians and the DJs.
Yeah. And you know what, as you were saying this, because you and I have talked about this a lot more before we zeroed in on, our comic book focus for this show. We used to talk more about tech and things like that, and the suggestion engines and curation and all that kind of stuff. And what's occurring to me is that it is much harder than like movies or even music or something to say, if you like this, you might like this, because comic readers, we jump all across genres, and we'll jump into genres that we didn't even know we would like, because you don't have to be a genre fan to be like, my genre is comics. It's not vampires or something where you're going to run out of suggestions really quickly. It's like, no, the art and the interesting way of telling stories sequentially that way, that's what gets me. So
you said librarians and I said DJs, but really, I mean, we've said this before, the best comic shop sort of clerks or owners are basically sommeliers.
Exactly.
They go, what are you interested in eating tonight? I have the perfect wine to go with that meal, because you may be interested in hamburgers. You may be interested in like the best cooked fish, $1,000 can buy. And there will be a wine pairing that works perfectly for that. And I think that, especially, we've talked about this to death, but one of my favorite aspects of this medium is that it allows for so much variety. Where I think maybe only music is the only thing I could see. And even the music, you get a little bit, a lot of, at least for me, and people I talk music with, you even still get a little insular there, where you're like, yeah, these three pockets are usually where I find myself. Whereas in comics, it's like, man, give me something I've never even thought about before. And it's like, here you go.
I love that metaphor of the sommelier. That's totally great. Yeah.
Yeah. Which we try to be that here too on panelism.
Yeah.
And
Todd likes a lot of fast food.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you have a good, oh, by the way, I'm so glad you mentioned this. I was going to say, as long as you find a good balanced meal somewhere in there. I was watching with my wife old cereal commercials from the 80s on YouTube.
Oh my God.
And like, cause we're just like, man, weren't cereals just crazy? Like everything from, and obviously the standards like Frankenberry and Count Chocula, but there are some crazy cereals based on like short, like the Gremlins cereal.
Yeah.
And, Smurfberry cereal was there for a little while. Flintstone, obviously, Fruity Pebbles has been there forever, but for every Fruity Pebbles, there's like 1,000 cereals based on TV shows or properties that just failed after a year. And they were all just god awful. But we were watching these commercials And every single one of them, and I completely forgot about this, at the very end of the commercial says part of a balanced breakfast or part of a nutritious breakfast. And I'm like, wow, what an insidious sort of like tag at the end of every commercial where it's like, here is literally pure processed sugar, part of a balanced breakfast. And kids hear that and they're like, well, surely this is good. Like you just sort of learn not to question it. What a brilliant marketing strategy. Although again, insidious, terrible.
And as an adult hearing that, all I can think of is, some regulatory agency said, you can't make it sound like this is all they have for breakfast. So I hear part of as an adult and I'm like, yeah, what they're saying is you need to have a good breakfast and then have a little cereal.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. When I was a kid, I was like, no, it's part of a balanced breakfast. I'm going to have it,
As long as I have orange juice and maybe like, a piece of toast, I'll be okay.
I'm fine. I don't know why I run out of energy at 10:30.
Oh my, no.
I had part of a balanced breakfast.
That's when schools are like, our kids are running out of energy at 10:30. Let's bring in pop machines so that they can just keep going throughout the day. And that's essentially what my school did. And man, that was
I love that Jerry Seinfeld has a bit about Cookie Crisp. And he's like, how did they think they could get away with this? It's like literally chocolate chip cookies that you pour milk on. Like what parent fell for that for their kids?
Oh man, there was one we were looking at that was almost worse than Cookie Crisp. It was it was like a Dunkin' Donuts cereal. And it was actual like little hardened dunk, like chocolate and glaze. And they're like, choose a flavor, chocolate, vanilla, or glaze. And then literally right after that, part of your balanced breakfast. I'm like, Christ.
Part of. Oh, well, I will say what you were about to say before we digressed into cereal talk, which is if you enjoyed this podcast, look for Panelism on your podcast platform of choice. We should be on all of them. And if we're not, please let us know. The best way to let us know that is to follow us on Instagram at panelism.inc, INK. And we're also on the web at panelism.inc, where you will find links to subscribe to us and old episodes and all that kind of stuff.
And look for my new show, Serial Talk, starting on the Panelism Network in August of 2020. We're working on it now.
I was going to joke that it's just called Serial, but it's spelled like with a C. But then I realized, like, I bet someone's already done that.
Oh, and hopefully it's a parody of the Serial.
Yeah.